afternoon. So if you are here for using Twitter to promote your message, you are in the right place. My name is Gina Rodriguez. I am the project manager of the Community Health Training Institute, and we want to welcome you to this webinar. We are very excited to have you here today and tell you a little bit about what we've got going on. So Natalie and Kelly are our trainers today who will be leading this webinar. So in a second, I will hand it over to them and they'll bring that PowerPoint back up and lead us through. But to give you some more information, the Community Health Training Institute is a project within Health Resources in Action, which is a public health organization here in Boston, Massachusetts, although we do work all around the country and across the state. And we are also funded by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So all the webinars that we provide, all the trainings that we provide are absolutely free. So if there's anything that you're interested in, please feel free to head up our website, hriainstitute.org. Try that again, hriainstitute.org. And you can find more information about who we are, all the trainings that we provide, and all the cool things that we have to offer for the remainder of the year. So we're really excited to be here today. I'm going to ask Kelly to bring up the PowerPoint once again, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this webinar is set up and what the format that we have for today, because it's a little different from what we've done in the past. So we are going to do a 30-minute conversation-based presentation when I hand it over to Natalie and Kelly, and they're going to lead us through their PowerPoint. And then after their presentation, we don't want folks to walk away or to log off, because we're going to have a very 30 minutes sort of Q&A facilitated discussion, really get a chance to hear from you all what you're thinking about Twitter, how you're using it in your work, any additional questions that you may have that perhaps wasn't covered either in the presentation, or anything that you have coming up in your mind as they're talking today. And we're going to be with you for an hour, so we're here from 12:30 to 1:30, and we really want folks to participate. Hit up that chat button that you see on the bottom of your screen, or the Q&A button, to ask us questions, to make comments, to share resources. We want it to be as interactive as possible. And if you currently have a Twitter account, grab your phone, open your Twitter app, and you can tweet us at CHTI Chat. You can submit questions this way as well. We have one of our lovely colleagues off screen, Tanayo, who will be watching our Twitter feed to see if we get any questions via our hashtag, again, CHTI Chat. And that's how it's going to work. So again, if you have any questions you don't quite understand, or you have any questions about the content, you can hit up the chat button or the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And I think with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Natalie and Kelly to lead us through.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Cashin, and I'm a project manager here in the Training and Capacity Building Department of Health Resources in Action. And I am here sort of in a capacity because several of the projects that I've worked on here in TCB, I have handle kind of the social media component of that, and my background is in communications, and my education is in there too. So yeah, that kind of is what brings me here. And before I jump in, Kelly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so hello everyone, excited to join you all today. My name is Kelly Dankert, and I'm the training associate for the Community Health Training Institute at HRIA, and I also work on another project called the Opioid Overdose Prevention Training Project. And I'm here leading this training with Natalie today because I've been the one leading the social media for CHTI, their LinkedIn and our Twitter. I have a background in journalism before I got into public health, and do a lot of writing and communications too. So yeah, excited to talk to you more about how to use Twitter.
Wonderful. So we'll start off with going over our objectives for today. So as Gina said, this is going to be hopefully a little bit more casual, conversational than a typical webinar would be. But what we want to have you all be able to walk away from today with is understanding the difference between just broadcasting messages on Twitter, and really any social media, and the difference between that and actually engaging folks via your outlets. thinking about identifying your brand as a coalition and what the messages you really want to be using that are going to align with that brand when you're promoting and using Twitter, and also identifying strategies for getting a better Twitter following. So how do you actually get followers? How do you maintain them? And how do you keep them engaged is really what we're going to be talking about today. So any of you who have come to any of our social media webinars before, we often put this quote up from Eric Qualman, and it's just a really great thing for all of us to keep in mind as we're working in social media, and that is we don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it. If you're here, I assume this is something you've thought about before, this is something you know, but this idea that social media is happening whether or not we are a part of it. And so it's going to just continue to be that way, I think. So for us and our work and you all in your coalitions, it's really about how we're engaging in that field rather than, you know, our option whether or not to do it.
Yeah, and this is really wherever you fall on the social media spectrum. If you've been tweeting for years, if you're on Facebook, or if you're just starting out, I think no matter where we're at in our social media journey, it can feel daunting. And we're really here to make this feel less daunting, to give you more tools to add in your toolbox so that whether you're just starting out Twitter, or you want to do a rebrand, or you just want to tweet more often, this is what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, great. So the first thing we're just going to start off with is talking about Twitter itself. So we've had, you know, I've been able to and honored to come and do several different webinars on social media in general and talked about several different platforms. But since we're focusing specifically on Twitter today, we want to start out just with the basis of what is Twitter and how does it differ from other social media platforms. So this is just some, as you can see on the slide here, some information about what really Twitter is about. It is a fast-paced social media network, so it is constantly moving and changing all the time within seconds. It's really values driven, so a lot of what's happening on Twitter is really folks sharing and exchanging ideas based on their values. It's can, you know, depending on who you are, it can be a lot less, you know, just pushing information out and promoting your events, but really folks are engaging and they're really having conversations about what they care about on Twitter. It's a place that if you do want to promote stuff, to keep just little updates, give the key information without going hugely overboard or giving a lot of information like you might on a different site like Facebook or something. And then it's a place where visually using static images or GIFs or memes or things like that is really better suited. Video and things like that, it's a little bit harder. It's not terrible, but it's just for this platform, it's ideal to use those static images, GIFs, memes, things like that. And for engagement, when we're talking about how do we have people engage with us, thinking about that can look like asking people to retweet our messages, thinking about posting something or tweeting something and asking folks to weigh in, creating a conversation in that, creating kind of a thread of conversation, using hashtags, and even jumping on the bandwagon of hashtags that are popular on Twitter and using it for your own conversation can be fun. And then doing things like Twitter chats or storms, which if you're not familiar with those terms, Kelly's going to be talking a lot more about that later in the webinar. So feel free to just sit tight with your questions about that.
So yeah, now we're going to go over really how to plan your content. So we know what Twitter is for. We know how best to engage people instead of just shouting things into the void, saying, hey, I have this cool event going on. I have, you know, this cool blog post. Because Twitter is so fast-paced, this engagement piece should really be tied to content planning. So we're going to talk about how you can engage people through planning your content.
So I think the best place for us to start is to tell you a little bit about how we've used this ourselves in the work that we've done. So I mentioned before that I have done social media in different projects here. Primarily that's been with the 84 movement, which is a youth tobacco prevention program for the state of Massachusetts. We're also funded by the Department of Public Health. And we have several different social media platforms that we actually use. We have an Instagram, we have a Twitter, we have have a Facebook. And over time, we've realized and kind of understood that those outlets really mean that we're engaging with different audiences in each of those places. And for a youth program like ours specifically, we found that Instagram was really the place that we can engage with young people. That's where they're at. That's the easiest to reach those that audience. We found with Facebook, we had a lot of our adult advisors and adults that were working with youth. That was really a good platform for us to use for that, or to broadcast a lot of detailed information about our events. But that Twitter was really a space where we're engaging in a larger conversation about tobacco prevention and youth with other people, not just in the state, but other statewide youth programs like ours, with folks who are working at national level, like Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. So for us, it really Twitter became a space where we were engaging with stakeholders and partners in sort of this bigger picture, larger conversation of what it means to be involved in youth tobacco prevention work. So our messaging and who we engage with in that platform is a lot different than who we are in like our Instagram, for example.
Yeah. And CHTI, short for the Community Health Training Institute, we always knew that we existed in the Twitter world and the LinkedIn world because we do serve to build the capacity of coalitions in Massachusetts, and somewhat even nationally too, because our webinars are not limited just to Massachusetts residents. We have folks coming in from across the country. And so we wanted to keep that in mind when we were looking at Twitter too. And when we first started this journey, we had about, I think, a little less than 400 followers, and we've been able to grow that in these 3 years to over 700, which has been awesome. And that's really been because we've been intentional about how we brand ourselves and how we communicate the work that we do. CHTI exists in this kind of general realm because we work with coalitions across a wide variety of topics, from health equity, racial equity, LGBTQ plus health outcomes, people who work in tobacco. So we try to exist in this generic world so that we push out content in all of these different areas too. And in doing so, we found that we've been able to connect with other stakeholders doing this work and other public health institutes. So we're not necessarily reaching the training participants, but we're reaching other thought leaders, other public health institutes who spread our message, who we promote their message. And in that, we've been able to grow not only our Twitter following, but our training following too.
Awesome. So now we're going to dive into what it actually looks like to build out content for your Twitter. And so we like to think about this rule for content strategy for really any social media, but especially for something like Twitter, is that we use this kind of 60-30-10 idea that 60% of the content that you're putting out is curated from external sources. So it's actually not original content that you are pushing out there all the time. So it takes a little bit of pressure off of having to constantly be the one coming up with creative ideas, because Twitter really is about sharing ideas and engaging. And so using 60% of curated content is great, and we'll talk about what that means in an example in a minute. 30% of it is your own original content, so creative ideas that you have in terms of spreading messages or ideas, starting conversations that are coming from you. That really is your own content. And then 10% of it being that promotional. So really trying to, I think especially for programs, we tend to have a default that becomes our content all the time. Is that when we have an event or we have a webinar to promote, or we have a meeting or a survey we want folks to take, that becomes our content all of the time. And that's really just promotional, and it's not really transactional. It's not really a way to engage people. You're just kind of pushing out that promotional content. So trying to limit that and really think about this balance of content.
Yeah, and for me, the 30 and 10%, the original content, promotional, sometimes that blurs in my mind, and the easiest way for me to differentiate that is that promotional always has an ask attached to it. Please share, please come to our event, please do something, take this survey. Whereas the original content is like, hey, we wrote this thought piece, we wrote this resource. So that's really how it's helpful for me to differentiate that way.
So we're just going to give a couple of examples of what we really mean by this. So each of these will have an example of how the 84 has done this and how CHTI has done this. So on what would be your left-hand side, there is you say it says you retweeted at the top. This actually came from the 84's Twitter page, but it was a piece of content that we were curating from someone else. In this case, Health Resources and Actions Fight All Flavors campaign. So because it was tobacco related and because there were youth featured here, we were like, this is really something that the 84 is about, although it is not a campaign that the 84 was a part of. But we wanted to sort of retweet that and curate that.
Yeah, and you can just retweet and not add a comment, but if you want to, you can add a comment. I always like to add a comment just because I think it helps set the context, it helps tie it back to the work that you're doing. I know in October, we were starting to develop a webinar that we're going to be doing later on this year, probably like February or March, around creating inclusive spaces for LGBTQ plus folks. And so I had that in the back of my mind, and so I saw this tweet. It was also a trending hashtag too. And so it's just a way to jump on something that was already trending to get more eyeballs on it, that also tied back to the work that CHTI was doing, and just added the hashtag podcast, because I know when I'm looking for a new podcast, I tend to go on Twitter, because as we know, folks who have Twitter accounts have strong opinions and usually good recommendations on things like that. So yeah, piggybacking on hashtags is one of the key strategies that CHTI uses.
Mm-hmm. So next up is our original content. So as Kelly was saying, this is really about you just putting something out there or celebrating something or putting your content out into the world. So this is an original content piece that we did that was really just thinking and celebrating the work that the 84 has done when Governor Baker signed the law banning all flavored tobacco products. So this was a huge effort that 84 has worked on in different ways over years. And so this was just like a way for us to throw a message out, thanking our chapters and acknowledging that work.
Yep, and we had Election Day trending on Twitter back in September, and so this blog post, Tanaya, who's off screen, actually wrote the prior year, but it was still relevant. It was just a generic post about how you can move community health work forward by being civically engaged, because a lot of public health initiatives pass on the local or the state level too that have a lot of impact for our coalitions, and so we weren't asking people to vote, we were just creating our thought piece around this and also hopping on those trending hashtags again.
And then lastly, this is that promotional content. So here you can see we're promoting our training menu for the 84 and asking folks to take a look and request a training from us. Yeah, this is one of many examples of some of the things that we promote, but again, trying to keep it to that 10%.
Yeah, same. And so when I try to promote for CHTI too, not just promoting our own events, but promoting those people who are our own cheerleaders. The Milking Institute is another fantastic training institute who always shares CHTI's trainings. And so we like to return the favor to keep that partnership going. And so I was promoting their newsletter, which had a ton of resources that our coalitions would definitely benefit from. So you don't have to necessarily be promoting your own stuff if you don't have anything. You can promote people that you either are already partnered with or want to strategically partner with too. When you tag them, they get that notification, and if you do that often enough, they're going to notice, oh, Training Institute always engages me, I should retweet and promote them too.
Yeah, so just to kind of give a couple of pointers here at the end of sort of when you're thinking about building your content out for your Twitter account, is thinking about how you're using hashtags. So Kelly gave some great examples about looking at what's trending on Twitter and saying, how can I kind of steal one of those hashtags and use it, or creating your own hashtags for different events like we did here for this webinar. Using eye-catching images and infographics. So that's something we pay attention to a lot on the 84, because if we're promoting something or doing anything, we always try to attach a picture if we have one. And thinking about including links, asking folks to retweet, and as Kelly just mentioned, tagging folks that are relevant. So whether you're actually trying to engage in conversation or promoting something from that stakeholder, or sometimes we will just randomly tag some of our partners in a message to try and get them to re-engage with us, to try to get them back and draw them back into our page. And another tactic is to send messages or tag new followers as they come in. There are actually programs that will do that automatically for you, so you don't have to pay attention to that, but that's a way to just engage people right off the bat when they join.
Yeah.
The other thing that we wanted to touch on is when to post on Twitter, because I think this is something that is underrated, actually, in my opinion, in terms of social media. I think any social media influencer or someone who does it for their job will tell you that there are specific times that are better to post on different platforms. For Twitter, they talk, it's often considered best times around lunchtime when folks are checking their phones during lunch, around 3 p.m., that break in the afternoon when everyone kind of steps away from their desk or needs to go get a coffee, or even young people if they're engaged in Twitter when they're done with school, and then between 5 and 6 during that rush hour time if folks are commuting especially. So thinking about when you're sending out messages, and if sending it out at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday might not be the best time to get a lot of folks to see that. So just paying attention to that and thinking about those best times. And as it says here, 181% of people are more likely to be on Twitter during their commute. And then it just highlights there that Wednesdays at lunchtime and in the evening are generally peak times for Twitter.
Yeah, and if this sounds stressful or overwhelming, it's okay, because you don't have to set an alarm on your phone for 12 or 3 or 5 p.m. every day. Natalie's going to go over this amazing resource where you can schedule your tweets to go out at these peak times, so you can do this all at once and just completely forget about it too. So we're really trying to target these like low-hanging fruit strategies to take the stress off of folks whose, you know, social media and Twitter management might not be your full-time job. It's definitely not either of ours.
Right, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hootsuite here, and if you've been on one of the social media webinars that we've done before, I've talked about Hootsuite several times, and yeah, Kelly's actually bringing up the Hootsuite for CHTI now because I'm realizing I'm not in the meeting with mine. But Hootsuite is a great tool. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a platform that you can utilize to, at the very base level, schedule and plan out all of your social media posts, and it will send them out at the time that you schedule so that you don't have to do it actually at that time. So at the very base level, it's a great scheduling tool for you to use so that you can plan out your social media. There's also a lot of other functions of Hootsuite that I find really helpful, especially for Twitter. So as you can see here, on the screen is CHTI's Hootsuite. So, and this is for the Twitter. So you can see there are several different, what they call kind of streams. And each of these columns is for a different purpose. So there's one, Kelly, if you scroll all the way back over to the beginning. There's ones here that are the tweets that are actually coming from CHTI, and you can also add another stream that says all the ones that are scheduled. You have scheduled, but this is the actual stream for CHTI. The next one is anytime CHTI is tagged on Twitter, it'll pull all of those here, so that way you can go on and respond and like or engage every time somebody is tagging you. And then from there on is ones that Kelly has created for CHTI that you can create for your own Twitter page and for your own Hootsuites, where you're basically asking Hootsuite to pull tweets from for a specific purpose. So for example, the one over on the left that says hashtag health equity, it's basically asking Hootsuite, anytime the hashtag health equity is used, I want you to pull it into this stream. So that's exactly what Hootsuite will do. So you don't have to go into your Twitter platform and search and like from there. It brings it all up for you. The next column is key stakeholders. So this is actually asking Hootsuite and saying, I want all of these people that I follow on Twitter, so choosing your key stakeholders, like those public health institutes and things like that. I want everything that's coming from those people to show up in one place, which is exactly what this is. So it just streamlines it. It means you don't have to go to each one of those individual pages or try and navigate through the stream on the actual Twitter page. It's right here, all pulled together for you. And you can actually comment, like it, retweet, do everything that you would do on Twitter from inside Hootsuite right here. So I actually, when I'm working with the 84s Twitter, I never go to Twitter itself. I never go to actually the Twitter site. I do all of the work here through Hootsuite. I don't know if you have other things to add, Kelly.
Nothing to add, just that it's so easy. You just do the new post, Right here, you select your channel, so HRA Institute, you make your tweet, there's that nice preview right there, and then you can schedule it for later. You gotta post it now, or you can schedule it for next week at 1:05 p.m. So again, really intuitive, really easy to use.
The other thing that I'll just mention about Hootsuite that we're not going to spend a lot of time on here, but that might be helpful to you, especially if you're dealing with a funder or you need to report on things, is that you can pull analytics from Hootsuite. So you can get a lot of information in terms of how your followers have increased, how much engagement you've had, and they measure engagement similarly to how we identified it, how many people are retweeting you, commenting, things like that. And so all of that can be pulled there. There's like a little bar graph visual over there on the left-hand side, and it will pull all of your analytics for you for a given date range.
Yeah. So what I do, I block off like an hour or two on my calendar on Friday when other things might be slower, and I'll just schedule tweets out for the week. So even if I get really caught up in the next week, there's still content going out too.
Right.
So yeah, really easy. And we talked about curating content, and we're going to talk about building your audience, but just remember that even though we're separating it out into different sections, the two are so interrelated. So when we think about building our audience and around curating content, you really want to think about, who do I want to connect with? Am I on Twitter to connect with young people? Which, as Natalie said, I think Instagram was really the social media app that they wanted to focus on for the 84, because that's really where they targeted young people. Do you want to target businesses, stakeholders, academics? It's so funny, the academic Twitter is one of the most active Twitter communities I have ever been involved with. I know EpiTwitter, hashtag EpiTwitter. If you have a public health report, or if you have a problem around like creating a survey, or you have a question or you want to share something, all you do is do the hashtag EpiTwitter or hashtag academic Twitter, and people engage, people respond, and there are communities and lists like that for everything. We use the MA Coalitions hashtag to see other coalitions and what they're doing. And so where CHTI lives, we really fall into this stakeholder realm. We know Twitter works for us to connect with these public health institutes and other folks who are these thought leaders in the work. And so I mentioned earlier that CHTI has grown our Twitter following from about over 300 to over 700, which is huge. And we've really been able to do this in a way that has not been super time consuming by engaging in these things called Twitter chats, which Twitter chats are these opportunities where people carve out time of their day, like a calendar invite, where for an hour you just tweet about a given topic. And it's usually one of like the big public health institutes like APHA, like NNPHI, who host these, and they're all topic related. And so in that hour, you're responding to questions, you're using the same hashtag, and you're answering targeted questions that are able to tie back to your work and to tie back to whatever topic that they're on. So these are really big around National Public Health Week, which is in April. But anytime there's a themed month like World Environmental Health Day or anything like that, there's usually a Twitter chat. And you can find these by what they're trending on Twitter. They're also sent out through newsletters a lot of the time too. And you can also find them just by Googling. I think there's a website called Tweet Reports where they list out a schedule of every Twitter chat happening. And they're usually at least for every single day. One account that we follow for CHTI is Salute America, and they focus on health disparities, and they do a weekly Twitter chat every Tuesday. And Twitter chats are really helpful because it's just all like-minded accounts gathering together to discuss a topic that you're invested in, they're invested in. You have a built-in attentive audience. We mentioned that the internet can get really crowded, that Twitter is really fast-paced. This is a time where people have booked it in their calendars to monitor this hashtag. And so they're sending out their content, but it's also encouraged to promote what other people are tweeting out too. And so it is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit that you could do to promote your content. And it's great because you can tie it back to your work, and you can also tag your partners too. And on the right is our example of getting involved in NEHA's Twitter chat for World Environmental Health Day. And so usually what we do if we're participating in it, we'll announce that we're participating, and people really do respond to it. And so it's not just arbitrary. We're not just saying do this because they're fun, which even though they are fun, they do have a big impact. For that Twitter chat that I just talked about, This is a screenshot of our Twitter analytics, and you'll see that through that entire week, we gained over 10,000 impressions. Impressions are just eyeballs, people who are viewing your content. So in that 8-day period, we gained over 10,000, and you'll see that on the day of the Twitter chat, the majority of those impressions were generated that day for the health and climate Twitter chat. So really impactful. We usually gain around 10 followers every time we do this. And so if you're doing that on a month-to-month basis, that's, my math brain is really being tested. 120?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Have you ever participated in a Twitter chat?
I have, yeah. So they have, I've done it several times so Kick Butts Day is a national youth tobacco prevention day that the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids kind of hosts, but a lot of people do it in their own state and in their own programs, but they generally have some sort of Twitter chat around Kick Butts Day or around a certain tobacco topic. So that's really has always been a great way that we've been able to interact with like other programs like the 84 in other states, and hear about different ways that people are handling different programming aspects, and you get a lot of cool ideas that way too.
Oh yeah, I always learn a ton from participating. So just some general tips for participating. Don't do it alone. Grab a colleague. As myself and my colleague Tamaki, who handles the overall HRA Twitter. And so you'll see that we have our 3 laptops in front of us and our phones. So we were managing a couple different accounts, and Twitter chats are really fast paced. So it's helpful to have someone sitting right next to you to be like, okay, they're asking about asthma and health. Like, what are we doing? How can we connect our work to asthma and health? And so having that person to brainstorm with is really helpful, and just having someone to break it up. The hour goes by really fast, so that support is really helpful. I think planning ahead is also good. A lot of Twitter chats will release their questions in advance. Really how Twitter chats work is that over the hour, people will have about 10 questions that they'll give out that are related to whatever the theme is. And so you can get that list beforehand, so you can kind of have an idea of what aspects of your project you want to promote, what resources you want to promote. And so you're not spending all those 10 minutes thinking to yourself, oh no, like how can I do this? But with that being said, though, Twitter chats are fast. If you only have 10 minutes to answer the question, you don't have to answer all the questions. What you could do, you could just retweet or comment on other people what they're answering for that question. It's still a way to engage, and it's still a way to kind of remind people that your account exists, you're involved in this work, and you're a partner in this work. And most importantly, just have fun, retweet, and tag other people, because this is a cool time where you can learn a ton about what's going on either in the state or across the country. Anything you want to add?
No, that's great. Yeah.
So this could apply for anything in Twitter chats or also just in general for Twitter. If you want to engage your audience, you really want to use multimedia. I'm not going to go through this too in depth because Natalie brought this up already, but Twitter is so fast-paced, and you really want to cut through all that noise by showing your personality and incorporating humor. After the National Public Health Week chat, we tweeted this GIF of everyone standing and applauding at the Oscars, just because I know I've left the Twitter chat feeling really inspired with what people were saying, and so I really wanted to show my gratitude and to show that I was really applauding everyone doing this amazing work. And Twitter makes it easy. There are plugins that you can just search GIFs depending on what you want to talk about. Like you could just search cat GIF or, applaud, gratitude, things like that, and things will come up. You can attach images, infographics if you're talking about the impact of your project, creating an impact infographic on either Canva, which has free versions, or PictoChart. That's another way to just visually show the information, so it's not just black and white words. For this piece of engagement, I think the most important thing and why we've been able to grow our Twitter following is because we haven't just been shouting our content into the void. We've been really strategic at looking at organizations in Massachusetts, across the nation, that are doing similar work, and we want to promote them. We want to shout them out, and we want to uplift people who uplift us too. So for example, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, CXGI has worked with them for years. They do a lot of cool work around built environment, around climate health, and around the intersections of public health and all these different silos. And so whenever they have an event, we try to tag them, promote their work, and also the Build Healthy Places network too. a lot of their work focuses on the built environment. And we want to make sure that we're engaging champions for CHDI in particular across sectors, because public health really doesn't exist in a silo, and nor should your Twitter content. You really should be finding these people whose content directly relates to your work, but also might be a surprising connection too. How do you find your champions?
Yeah, I think we, in very similar ways, I think we have thought about who are our partners, are like actual partners outside of the social space, and make sure to engage them on social media. I think we've also found a lot of partners through some of those Twitter chats or through some of those hashtags. You know, people who are using hashtag youth or hashtag tobacco, pretty clear, maybe we want to be partners with them, or maybe we want to seek them out. And so I think not only thinking about who your real life partners are that you can then find in the social space and utilize that, but also like using these opportunities and seek, because for a long time, you know, I think I was pretty complacent about Twitter, and I was like, it's going to do what it's going to do. I'm just going to post things every once in a while, but it is so interactive. It is so much about engagement that if you're not at least trying to search for organizations or just do a quick Twitter, you know, look through and see who you can find that maybe has similar values of you in their bios or whatever have you, then it's not going to work for you. You really have to be seeking that out. And I think once you start to build that up and like build these lists in Hootsuite, we really started to recognize who were the ones that were engaging back with us. And that was really, really great to figure out who those people were that we could actually be in conversation.
Yeah, and you mentioned like actual partners, so MAPC, we've worked with them before, but Build Healthy Places, they're through the Public Health Institute, which is over in Oakland, California. So again, we are making sure that we're engaging people both that we actually work with and people who just are doing really cool work that's similar to ours, you know, across the nation. And one other thing that I'm just catching now, Twitter does not have autocorrect, so always read your tweets at least 3 times, because I'm noticing now that I put an extra L in climate equity, so just something to keep in mind. Twitter does not autocorrect. So that was our 30-minute, a little bit over 30-minute pretation. So we really wanted to leave the rest of the time to answer all of your questions too, because we did go through this rapid fire. So I don't know, Gina, if you want to facilitate the Q&A.
I am happy to do that. People have been submitting questions as you've been presenting. So I want to encourage folks, now is the time to be involved in this conversation. As Kelly and Natalie have been mentioning, Twitter is really fast paced. And I think one of the ways that we can better understand how to engage with the platform and engage with our partners is by talking with each other about how we can best use it to spread our message. So I'm going to ask that we bring up our camera again so we can see, well, so you can see us. Join us on the couch and let's have a chat about what is going on with Twitter. So the first question that I have here, again, you can use your Q&A or your chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit a question, and we'll make sure that it gets to Kelly and Natalie during this Q&A section. So one of the questions that we have here, you guys went over Hootsuite very quickly. Can you use it with other social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and does it work similarly?
Yes, and yes. Yes, so you can use it with all of those social media platforms you mentioned. We use it with all of ours for the 84. Facebook works exactly the same way. The caveat with Instagram is that Instagram, if it's a personal account, or if I should say, if your Instagram is not deemed a business account, which is really just clicking a button in your profile saying you want to be a business account, then you can schedule your posts, but it will not automatically post it for you at the time. You have to download the Hootsuite app on your phone, and it will send you a notification at that time and say, now it's time to post your thing, and then you can do it. So there is a little bit of an extra step if you're scheduling your Instagram through Hootsuite, unless you're a business account. But otherwise, it works exactly the same way for all the platforms, and the analytics are there for all of them too.
Yep. Same with LinkedIn too. CHTI uses that for LinkedIn as well.
Follow-up question: does the free version of Hootsuite offer all of that functionality, or is it limited?
Yes, we only do the free version of Hootsuite. We do not pay for it, and we are able to do all of those things.
Yep.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. There were lots of Hootsuite questions that came in as you both were talking, but you answered them.
Yeah, it's an amazing platform. I highly recommend it. It will change your life.
Seriously, it's so easy.
And then I have a question coming in from Valerie. Can you share a little bit more about your strategy for identifying and selecting hashtags?
You can start.
Yeah, I think for identifying hashtags, the first thing that I look at is what's trending right now and how can I tie that back. So for example, today Thursday Thoughts were tweeting, and so if I was more on top of my game, I would have said, oh, for Thursday Thoughts, I'm thinking about this Twitter training that I'm doing in 2 hours. So that's really the first one. But I think when you think about what you want to use, it's good to search and see what's already being used for that hashtag too. Like even just before this training, we were trying to figure out what hashtag we wanted to use for folks to engage. So we were trying out, hashtag my takeaway, hashtag CHTI chat. And so we were Googling what other people were saying to see if our hopeful message would align with that. So I think, figuring out the key takeaway that you want people to get from like the tweet, and also figure out like what the message already is around that hashtag too.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is something that we think about. I generally use a couple of hashtags. It takes up your space and your characters on Twitter, but for the 84, we generally always use hashtag youth because we'll have a specific hashtag for our event or whatever it is, but a generic hashtag that's more like a topic hashtag is helpful to get seen by a wider audience. So I'm not just saying hashtag youth tobacco prevention. First of all, that's very long. So staying away from really long hashtags is important. But hashtag youth, so I'm being seen by other people who are youth workers, maybe other people who are engaged with young people who aren't just working on tobacco, but are still could be a great partner. And the other thing I will just say is that it is helpful to see what else is being used for that, that hashtag, because sometimes you can lead yourself into a conversation you don't want to be having. For example, we have used hashtag vaping before when there's been a vaping conversation happening, but people are using that hashtag on both sides of sort of the vaping debate. And so it can lead you into a space and open you up and be seen by folks that hope maybe you don't want to be engaging with on Twitter, or maybe you do want to engage with the other side of the debate. And so just thinking about those things is generally pretty important. So I would say using generic ones, using ones that aren't too long, thinking about what how else that hashtag is being used ahead of time. And
seeing what other people that you follow who have similar topics, what hashtags they use. Like last year, APHA, the American Public Health Association, that was their year of climate change, and so they used the hashtag climate change is health. And so a lot of other people were using that same hashtag too, so you could jump on the conversation. I wouldn't have thought of that unless I specifically went to APHA and thought, what hashtags are they using that I could hop on?
Great. So we have another question. I will say that there is construction happening in our building, so if you see little things moving in the background, do not be alarmed.
I see a man walking on a scaffolding on the 3rd floor behind us.
So that's what's happening there. But a lot of us are coming from the nonprofit world. A lot of the folks that are joining us today work in the nonprofit world. How do we maximize the effectiveness of our social media platforms, in Twitter specifically, without a dedicated staff person to do it? Like, how do we do the best with what we've got?
It's a great question. I would say using a platform like Hootsuite will help significantly, because I think part of the time consuming part of Twitter is just at least for me, is trying to figure out where the conversations are, who's having them, how do I engage, but really utilizing Hootsuite for Twitter and making those streams for yourself where it's pulling in the information right there for you and you don't have to go searching for it. So it's pulling in all the tweets from your partners for you. It's pulling in everything from that hashtag for you. Really cuts that time down. And so you can go in there and engage and like and comment with all of those things much quicker, and just dedicate like an hour to in the week to do that. I think, like Kelly said earlier, giving yourself just like a little bit of time to schedule all your stuff for the next week.
Yeah.
So using tools like that just cut down on you having to be on it every single day, because that can be unrealistic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And having to just constantly be on, like, engaging with folks, because I'm not going to miss a conversation from a stakeholder because I can go and look at the stream. So I think that's like the biggest tip I could give to help you to get the most out of it with less time.
Yeah, me too. I think Hootsuite's a great resource. Literally blocking off time on your calendar, like usually Fridays at 3 p.m. when I hit that lull that their eyeballs are on Twitter, I usually will use that time to schedule out tweets. I don't want to promote a poor work-life balance, but I do have the CHTI Twitter account on my phone, and so I'll get notifications when things are trending, and I'll just open it and click that retweet button, and so I'm not putting any time and effort into it. It's just getting a notification, retweeting that. I'm not recommending everyone do that, but if you want to, it's an easy way to keep on track of it outside of Hootsuite. And I think also just capitalize on the events that you're doing. If you're going to a conference, if you're going to a training, or if you just see like a billboard, like I was on Park Street Station earlier and I saw in Boston, and I saw a poster for Narcan, and so I took a picture of it with the intention to tweet it out. And so just, making sure that if you have a big event, if you're already doing something where you think social media could benefit from that, just like tie it in together. It doesn't have to be, this is just my time to do Twitter.
Yeah, what I would say too, and I know that this is really difficult and we struggle with it too here, is that I, as much as possible, would strongly recommend not poning your social media off on an intern or a temporary employee. One, because I think, number one, we should be taking social media more seriously as a consistent part of our programming. But two, I think turnover can be hard for social media like momentum. If you're having a new person like every 6 months, like changing up, or like if that person who's managing that social media is changing all the time, it can be hard to create a consistent strategy and a consistent voice on your platform. So I know that it can be really hard to have that person be consistent, but as much as possible, try to do that.
Yeah. And one last thing too, like aligning your content like in a planner or tracker. For our team at CHTI, we have a master spreadsheet of our communication plan where each month has a different theme. They usually align with the trainings that we're hosting and other events going on that we want to highlight. So if we're writing a blog post about it, we already have some tweets that are drafted that we can just push out. And we have, each person on our team is assigned a different piece, so we're not all holding one thing. The work is divided, and it feels a lot more manageable when you want to have it written down with people's names attached to it that you can keep each other accountable to.
Awesome. Great. Some behind the scenes CHTI action happening there. We do have some questions about the target audience engagement as we're talking figuring out how to schedule it, whether you're doing it live. How often should people be tweeting if they want to continue to keep engaging this target audience? Is it every day? Are they scheduling a couple times a day? What would you suggest?
I think every day if you can. I think so first of all, I think it depends on the platform. We're specifically talking about Twitter. I think people generally post more than once a day. I don't think that that's necessarily realistic for programs. We do not post more than once a day very often, unless there's an event or we're live tweeting something. So we try every day, or at least like 4 times a week. it's just, sometimes we just don't have as much content. Sometimes it's a lot harder, depending, but I think at least once a day is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, there really is no formula to every day is great, but I think even just a couple times a week is good. Participating in Twitter chats whenever possible. If there's a national day that relates to your work, at least tweeting on that. So, you know, you have some kind of consistency, like, okay, I post on the major holidays that relate to public health. That's a great place to start if, you know, you feel overwhelmed by it. But ideally tweeting every day, but I wish there was a perfect formula for it, but there really isn't that we found.
Yeah, and you can work your way up. Like, you don't need to start from not having much going on to posting every day, because that's not going to be very consistent. It's not going to be, I don't know, as successful for you, I don't think. But yeah, like Kelly said, building up and like making small goals and eventually getting to that place. And not being discouraged if things aren't happening right away. If you don't go from 20 followers to 700 followers in a week, like, that's pretty unrealistic. So trying to be patient with it, and just work on consistency.
We had a couple questions around messaging. And so, Natalie, you mentioned using hashtag vaping and sort of being pulled into a conversation that you didn't want to necessarily be a part of. How do you both figure out which other partners to follow or other organizations that seem like a mission fit, who to retweet, and sort of if somebody follows you, do you follow them back automatically? Is there any research or strategies or policies that you guys have within your program and your work that helps you make that decision?
Yeah, so I could talk about what this has looked like for us on the 84, which is a very specific experience. So because we're working with young people, because we're funded by the Department of Public Health, we have some pretty significant like guidelines we've placed on ourselves, which is, you know, we don't engage with anybody that's in the industry on or supports the industry on social media. So you know, that's people who are promoting vaping, whether or not they're part of the industry, stuff like that. We've just decided that that's not the conversation we need to be in. We don't need to be in debates with people about our beliefs to folks who are in the industry. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think in terms of how do you gauge, especially when you're trying to build partners remotely through Twitter that you don't know in person. There's no harm in following someone and then unfollowing them later. So my recommendation would be, and how we've done it before, is when we're searching for youth programs that we think could be aligned with us, we'll follow and put them in that. We have like a stream called youth groups or whatever on our Hootsuite that is all these programs that we think are programs like us, like the 84. And so we'll just do that. No harm in putting them there. And I'll kind of watch them and see what kind of content those programs are putting out, what kind of messages they're sending. And after a while, I'm able to get a sense like, okay, this is pretty aligned with us. I'll start liking, I'll start retweeting some of the stuff. Or it seems like, well, they do, but their message isn't really with us. So maybe I just like a tweet every once in a while, but I don't, you know, retweet it or engage them as much. So I think that there's no harm in following someone and then figuring out later that it's not somebody and unfollowing them. There's absolutely no harm in that. So you might as well. It's not like you're following someone and that is broadcasted to the world that now you accidentally followed a vaping company. Like, that's not, you know, you can just quietly unfollow them later. So I would say just experimenting and try and seeing what those people come up with and what that content looks like before you start engaging with them.
Yeah. When you're starting out on Twitter, it's always good to follow more people necessarily than follow you. But as you start to build up your following, I think a good rule of thumb is to try to balance the number of people that you follow with the number of people who follow you. And they're not going to be the same people, and that's totally okay. I follow some big public health organizations that don't follow me back, but a lot of the employees at those organizations might follow CHTI too, and I think that's totally fine. But keeping that balance is good because it just shows that, you know, you have a big following and, you know, you're not just like starting out. But when you are starting out, a good strategy is to follow more people, engage with them so that you can get those followers too. And the same rules apply for CHTI. We're funded through the state. So, you know, going back to our example about our blog posts about voting on election day, we weren't saying vote for one thing or vote for the other, but just here's how voting can push forward public health policy.
Yeah, and we keep talking about engaging with people on Twitter, but you don't have to just engage with people for the sake of engaging with people. And so being clear about the kinds of conversations you want to be having on Twitter. And it's okay if you don't, if it is totally okay to make that boundary for yourself and your coalition and your accounts that we're not here to have conversations with people who are like of a specific industry or are directly opposing our messaging. Because in my experience, even though that might be a greater tactic, oh, we want to engage people who don't agree with us, isn't necessarily fruitful on Twitter.
Yeah.
So I think you guys are speaking more, and it doesn't feel like as high stakes as perhaps it might feel like when you're first starting out. You don't really know what you're doing, so it feels like everything, the spotlight's on you. Oh no, I followed the wrong person. I retweeted this thing I didn't mean to. So it doesn't sound as high stakes. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see the tone of Twitter and like, Kelly, you mentioned a little bit about a sense of humor. Can you just sort of speak more into how people can really not be so scared of it?
Yeah, I mean, the stakes are pretty low. You can delete things if you realize that that's not the message that you want to be putting out. But I think really inserting your personality, inserting some humor, that's really the culture of Twitter. I think using GIFs, using memes. One of my favorite accounts is the APHA Get Ready account. It's their emergency preparedness. And every year, and even every month too, they have an emergency preparedness calendar that features animal memes and like cute puppies and how they're prepared, and it is the best thing ever. And again, this is like a national organization that's very well respected, so again, like, don't be afraid to be funny, to insert your personality. It's really how you get people to pay attention and follow you too.
Yeah, I think the thing that I try to remember is that, so Twitter is getting a bad rep, I think, and in general, I think there's a lot of attention on Twitter because a lot of celebrities use Twitter. The president uses Twitter. A lot of things happen on Twitter that are being reported out on news media as like real thing. And so it makes it feel very high stakes and like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be part of that world?
Yeah.
But the good news is that Twitter is not my Twitter. That version of Twitter is not the same version of Twitter that I engage with when I'm on as the 84 movement. Kelly kind of mentioned this earlier, that there are different levels because Twitter is so massive. There's levels and ways and literally ways you can filter out all of the rest of that noise and just have Twitter be about what you want it to be about, which is the messaging that you're trying to promote, this idea of being a public health conversation. That's the Twitter that I'm a part of, that Kelly's a part of, and that's, I think, probably the Twitter you want to be a part of. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to think about all the other parts of it. You know, I play roller derby, and there's a thing that we call Derby Twitter, and that's like just conversation about roller derby that happens on Twitter. And so you don't have to have conversation outside of what you're comfortable with on Twitter. And so to kind of think about it that way narrows it and makes it more relatable and real, I think, and less scary.
For sure.
Awesome. So we are heading towards 1:30. We have a couple minutes left. I wanted to know if either of you had any sort of closing comments or thoughts as we slide into the close for this webinar.
Yeah. Just if you have any more questions, we can pull up the slides again. Natalie and I are here to answer your questions. Our emails are on the slide. Let me pull that up right now.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I think my closing thought is just that the best thing to do is just start doing it.
Yes.
The best thing to do is to just start doing Twitter. If you could change a lot of things, and it's a very, because it's so fast paced, you tweet something and tomorrow it's gone, you know. So I think just trying it out and starting, because the biggest barrier, I think, is the mental blocks that we put on ourselves, making it seem like it's something that maybe it even isn't. So just try to do it. Just start sending tweets and see what happens.
Yeah, and be forgiving of yourself. If you don't tweet for a week, it's okay. There are times that we don't tweet for a week and we just pick back up and we start again, and that's totally fine.
So I want to thank both Kelly and Natalie. I wish I had that Oscars applause gift right now, for spending this hour with us and answering all of your Twitter questions. Again, if you want to connect with CHTI and learn more about the great work that we're doing, please visit our website, hriinstitute.org. follow us on Twitter. We would love to have you follow us. And again, if you have any more questions specifically for Kelly or Natalie or to us, all of our contact information is up on the screen. And we thank you so much for joining us. This will be recorded, so you can join us on our website and find this recording hopefully in a few days. And there will be a survey that will pop up when you exit out of this webinar. We would love to hear your feedback on this content, on how well you think this format worked, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.